think they were signaling in all of these different speeches at the World Economic Forum, and where you can go if you want to follow the money. So with that in mind, let's go into the final part, which was the most important part, the thing that has the most significant change and really confirms what we've been analyzing throughout our whole time in these Hard Talk Live episodes, that the Middle East is going to completely change, and that has knock-on effects. So I've told you about the downfall of the West, what it looks like. But remember, wealth doesn't get destroyed. It gets reallocated. So with the black pill of the West, there is a white pill of other regions. And you protect yourself. Obviously, I've always said Bitcoin and self-custody, hard commodities like gold, and then the manufacturing play with silver and various other things. You protect yourself with the orange pill, but, it's not, people always say, this is doomerism. No, this is just following the money and reality of what's happening in the West. But remember, the West backed up the dollar by all of the death, destruction, rape, pillaging, genocides, ethnic cleansing, piracy, covert wars, dictator installments, all of that stuff. This is the best news in the world for others that have been on the wrong side of the bombs. Now, remember, some people in America and Europe, they're feeling very down right now. They're getting 1% of what the Western currencies did to other regions. And they're having mental breakdowns and stuff right now, go into degeneracy. This was just 1% of what the West of the world, people in Africa, people in Asia, people in the global South in general, in the Middle East, have had to suffer. So this will be the PG version of what the military industrial complex did around the world, and they'll just bring it home because they're not trying to, they've got a little bit less brutality than what they've done in the countries where they're not, where they just wanted the resources and that's it. So, just put that in perspective when you're thinking about these trends as well. Right, so that was the Mark Carney speech. Now, as I said, let's go into part 3. Part 3 is where we had a series of speeches, and this was major. This is what I've been looking for. It was, firstly, President Trump gave a speech. Then some of his team, like Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, who's not actually part of the government, but acts like he is. He's actually the fund manager for making sure that Trump profits from all the deals he's negotiating, funded by Gulf sovereign wealth money, and many of the world leaders, and some of them are very notable, that are going to make up part of the border peace, which is about the first project of how you transition Gaza into the execution of the 20-point plan. Now, we've covered this a lot, that it's going to be a technocratic nightmare, but it's also going to be significantly better. It's not going to be justice, but it's going to be significantly better than what they were getting under Israeli occupation. And so let's go through part 3, which is the border peace explained, how it integrates into America's retreat and how to expect that, and the Middle Eastern reset. And I'm going to go through a bunch of background. I really want you to understand this stuff, because when you understand all of the history that led to this, you won't be fooled for the covert operations and civil unrest campaigns that are going to be happening in the West, because you'll understand that this is manufactured. And that's been my goal, is to make you not be a useful idiot to power by buying into those narratives. Okay, so Donald Trump gave his normal speech as well. It was a Davos address, and it was kind of the thing you're used to, him getting ready for campaign financing, saying how everything is the best, making America look like it's the best of everything. Everything's great. Everything's happening. Everything's record. But the notable thing is that he did push the case for the US to acquire Greenland, and there was a bit of a pump and dump during that as well. So he was framing the different types of pressure tactics, including the threat of tariffs, and then that led to the removal of tariffs, and then that led to, the first version of a negotiation. I personally believe that this Greenland thing is going to be a negotiation, but it's also a good way of making some military, flexing some military muscle, which is essentially a brochure for all the weapons that the military is looking to sell to prop up the stock market. But it was really, floated out a framework around what a deal with Greenland would look like. The NATO secretary, kind of reiterated, the strengthening of sales. Remember, NATO is a sales strategy for the MiC, and what a deal could actually look like anyway, a cash settlement and various other things. By the way, if you're from Greenland, you probably don't have any say in this, but there's only 50,000 of you. If you've got any lobby power, I'd be pushing for a cash settlement, terms around what will happen to your real estate and your land and property, and also a percentage in a sovereign wealth fund, and a percentage of the cash flows that are negotiated. If you can get yourself any of that, then I'd be pushing and using any leverage you have of the population of Greenland to try and make something like that to happen. But the big initiative was launching the border peace. And it was signed off by a bunch of countries. Notable was that Israel wasn't there, even though there was announcements that Israel is joining. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but they weren't there. Netanyahu wasn't on the board, despite the fact that there was stories out there that Netanyahu's going to be on the board. But the countries that did sign up are significant in terms of reiterating that this is a change. This is a real change. This isn't the old tactics. Nothing stops this train from here. This was Trump and his team and BlackRock and all the regional players that all know already what is required in order to get investment in this rebuild project. And no investment's going to come in if they think Israel and Iran are about to go to a massive regional war. If they don't think they can demilitarize Hamas, who have agreed to it because they were funded by Qatar, and Qatar money was part of covert operations. We'll be going through a lot of that today. I really want you to understand this so that you don't fall for all the different narratives. If any of that was going to happen, if Hezbollah was about to uprise in Lebanon in reaction to the strikes that are happening right now, if the Houthis weren't going to reopen the Red Sea, now the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey have taken part of their strategic assets. If any of that weren't going to happen, and we were about to have Israel rules the world, and they're going to take over, like the debate that I did with Professor Zhang, and the Pax Judaica, and taking over Al-Aqsa Mosque and creating a war that leads to Israel being the next center of the world, the narrative that's going out there, they wouldn't be raising finance and they wouldn't be getting this deal. Now, okay, you could see it as a psyop, but I don't think so. The people that were in the room and that signed off on this agreement were Pakistan, that's aligned with China, historically aligned with America. You also had Qatar. You also had Saudi Arabia. You also had Indonesia, which has been, very aggressive. And of course, Turkey. Now, Israel never, that was the big thing. They didn't want Turkey on there. But everyone that Israel didn't want to be there, as well as who they may have wanted there, was on there. And this is a signal of real power dynamics, that, the transnational capital I've always been talked about. And so I actually take this seriously, not because I believe anything they're saying, but I'm following the monetary flows and everything's making sense based upon all the AI, everything that I've said in the tech section and the macro section. This changes the world forever. And once you get, as I've always said, when everyone said to me, this will never happen, once you get a security force that is not Israel in Gaza, the Greater Israel Project is effectively over. Now, what I'm going to play anyway is how this happened. Remember, Trump works with Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund and China. There's that transnational capital. He works for the financial industrial complex. He's been doing everything that they want in order to move to this multipolar world order through tariffs and various other policies. There were Jeffrey Epstein leaks, but nothing coming out that leads to a problem in order to make sure everything's on track. And the Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, set up in Trump 1 the fund that was going to profit, so that as all these illegal settlements are happening, there's affinity partners investing so that the Gulf countries and the regional powers are going to end up in control of all of the land. And so while originally, and we'll go through this because I know people think that it's just Israel, and I think Israel's role has changed from what it is and how it's being framed right now. And it's evil, don't get me wrong. This is a division of the military industrial complex, and I'll be going through how this works. But we had a presentation from Jared Kushner raising finance. This is how they see it. This is just a transaction. If this doesn't tell you how all of these wars work, how the Build Back Better, European World Economic Forum agenda works, that you destroy and make money from destroying, and then you build back and make money from building, and then you implement technology and make money from continual surveillance on a service, on a continual service model, and then it comes back to defense contracts. That's what propped up the dollar globally. And that's the message. That's how it's always been. Now, just because we saw in 4K, real-time genocides but that's what everyone's been experiencing all along. And so you wonder why I'm happy that we're transitioning to this. And it doesn't matter what I think, because nothing I say makes any difference. I'm not advocating here. If I want to be the humanitarian, I'd want everything done differently. And I've been doing that all along. But I'm analyzing what I think is actually happening. And so with that in mind, Azad, let's go through the final video that we're going to play, which is Jared Kushner's presentation after Trump, after the signing of the board, the peace board, after all the different announcements. We got this ruthless, brutal sales pitch that highlights exactly what this was really about and how this really works. So Azad, let's play the final presentation.
Really, because of his heart, he wants to do this. So we did a master plan. We brought in, I thank Yakir Gabay, who's one of the most successful real estate developers and brilliant people I know. He's volunteered to do this, not for profit, really because of his heart. He wants to do this. And we've developed ways to redevelop Gaza. Gaza, as President Trump's been saying, has amazing potential. And this is for the people of Gaza. We've developed it into zones. In the beginning, we were toying with the idea of saying, let's build a free zone, and then we have a Hamas zone. And then we said, you know what, let's just plan for catastrophic success. Hamas signed a deal to demilitarize. That is what we are going to enforce. People ask us what our plan B is. We do not have a plan B. We have a plan. We signed an agreement. We are all committed to making that agreement work. There's a master plan. We'll be doing it in phasing. In the Middle East, they build cities like this in 2-3 million people. They build this in 3 years. And so stuff like this is very doable if we make it happen. Rafah will start with. This will show a lot of workforce housing. We think this could be done in 2-3 years. We've already started removing the rubble and doing some of the demolition. And then New Gaza. It could be a hope. It could be a destination, have a lot of industry, and really be a place that the people there can thrive, have great employment. Once this starts going, we think there should be 100% full employment and opportunity for everybody there. And we have a lot of data on what can be, but we think that this really gives the Gazan people an opportunity to live their aspirations. But it all starts with security, and it all starts with governance. Final note I'll just say on the Board of Peace, which is that all the lessons we're doing is we're basically studying the best practices from all over the world, and we're watching who does education the best, who does healthcare delivery the best. All of these things it's not secret IP. All this is IP that the Board of Peace is going to make public, and we want to encourage all the countries to be able to follow these best practices. A lot of the things that President Trump is doing in America, if they're working, we should all be copying them. If we find what's working in other countries, we should be copying them too. And so what the Board of Peace will have the ability to do if we're successful with Gaza is really show how do you do peace implementation, which is something that when we got this deal done, we didn't really find too much expertise or know-how on how to do it. So as we're creating this system, hopefully it's something that we can just document these learnings and make them available to all else who want to use them in the future.
Okay, so remember what I said. And I publish blogs on this, and you can go to SimonDixon.com. You can go back in history and see everything. I said what happens in Gaza will mark the complete change into a multipolar world order. It will create peace in the Middle East and regional stability. But because China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Trump would take credit for it, and then he'd later get the Nobel Peace Prize. So this is China and the Gulf's plan. But as America is the shrinking empire, they need to show strength and look like this is Trump doing it. But what is Trump representing? He is representing a model that will be rolled out around the world. And I said to you, whatever happens in Gaza is what they want to do to you. So when they do civil unrest in America and rebuild data centers, they're going to have a model for a full-blown, I think they call it freedom states or 15-minute cities and freedom cities. You can go out and look all these up. They will have, and we've already had announcements of Teslas that turn off if you're not, doing what they say, and houses that are going to be affordable for $7,000, and they can lock you in your house as a Tesla house. If you don't comply with their social credit scores and digital IDs and stuff. Anyway, this is going to be rebuilt. This is why they can make housing unaffordable so that you can end up with whatever they end up building here. Now, who's going to be able to build this infrastructure? Look at everything that was built in the Middle East. It was built by Bengalis, by Indians, using Chinese infrastructure and Gulf sovereign wealth money. And then they purchase American technology and Chinese technology. But China has a bunch of technology. America's making enemies. China's making friends. China's rebuilding, and it's going to come with those contracts, which is why China's going to grow and grow and grow. And America's going to be asset stripped and asset stripped. And in order to manage that civil unrest, you need a police state and surveillance state. Well, they beta tested that in Europe. And they beta tested that, and they're going to be building it with this being the beta test. This is not conspiracy theories anymore. When you follow the money, this is happening. Like, this isn't just theoretical. And so what do you need to do in typical fake it till you make it, everything is a lie, pitch, PR, misleading? You need to call it the Board of Peace. And if this doesn't tell you, if this doesn't make you want to boycott the system, because who's going to benefit from all of this? It's going to be your S&P ETF. This is why I so appreciate being able to have an exit. This is why I like to boycott the Federal Reserve with Bitcoin in self-custody. This is why I hold it in self-custody rather than a BlackRock ETF. This is why I invest local wherever I can and spend local wherever I can. And this is why I don't invest in the funding of these evil operations. And so this is, I just hope people get to understand that the whole point of this was to obfuscate you from the human tragedy that is created to roll over this debt-based Ponzi scheme, so that it can take all the assets from you, and the only people that make it are the ones that are compromised and engage in degeneracy and blackmail operations, while the rest just become a product with the debt. And this is how the system has always worked. You're just seeing it now because they're allowing you to see it now. because they want you to be angry. That's the reality of it. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to help you understand what this border peace is likely to achieve by following the money. This basically sets the new world order that I've been talking about. This is the transition to the multipolar world. Palestine ending the Greater Israel project is the linchpin for everything. So why is Gaza so important? Because the dollar is propped up by the petrodollar. America is energy independent and a net exporter. Everyone's selling their treasuries, and the financial industrial complex, or their bonds, and the financial industrial complex is strategically weakening the dollar. And so this creates that new transnational capital because the sovereign wealth funds are working with China. They have relationships. And that sets up what I've already been covering. And so the moment that Palestine is able to be, I doubt they'll get their land because they're selling it to investors. But the moment that they're able to be employed in the rebuild, and it makes me want to puke. As I said, this is not advocacy. Still better than what they had. The whole thing's disgusting. But when they are able to leave their country and they have self-determination and it's no longer an illegal Israeli occupation, the Greater Israel project is over, which means that the military-industrial complex has settled on terms to leave the Middle East, end the forever war once and for all. And they're asking, the mafia is asking the banks and financial institutions what they get in order to bless the region with not murdering their people and move into regional stability. So, as I've always said, what have I always said? If you're new to the show, I've got a lot of new people. A quick recap, and I want to make sure you got the history so you understand this, because when these operations are coming home, you need to recognize them. And that when you recognize them, you can empower yourself. In order to create peace in the Middle East, I have always said consistently, it requires three things. It requires normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That happened when China did it. It requires America military to stop using Turkey, Iran, Qatar, and Israel for funding their different proxies in order to destabilize the region. It requires that instead of the military sponsoring destabilization campaigns, the finance invests in regional stability and rebuild. And it requires a resolution to the Palestinian cause. Because without a Palestinian cause, Saudi Arabia would not normalize with Israel and join the Abraham Accords, and Iran resistance would continue, and all of that dynamics that was built out around this very clever divide and conquer strategy. If the military stops, the covert operation stops, and suddenly we'll recognize that war was always manufactured by radicalizing people and weaponizing religion in order to recruit armies and then destroying people, killing their families, killing their children in order to get them to join these radical militia groups that worked for intelligence agencies in order to acquire land and acquire resources for Western interest. And the Islamist terrorist was manufactured in order to allow this. The radical Zionist was manufactured, and the radical Christian Zionist that would engage in covering up in this operation and taking funding to allow this to happen for the military-industrial complex in Senate and Congress was all manufactured to weaponize religion to create the useful idiots. Now, why are we finding out about this now? Why is the algorithm allowing this content to come out now? Because it's part of the weakening of the dollar campaign. It's part of the strategic divorce with Israel campaign. It's exposing it so that they have plausible deniability, so that all the American people think we're the ethical ones. Our dollar's not backed up by this. We just got blackmailed and Jeffrey Epstein and AIPAC'd into this. And that's not alleviating the crimes against humanity that are happening by the Zionists and Israelis. But we've got to look to the top and follow the money. And the money's coming back to prop up the dollar in the US stock market. And it's being revealed right now because there's an operation to reveal that, because the FIC wants to partner with the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds. And they couldn't beat America in its destabilization, so it had to buy it. And that's essentially what happened. So what they always used Israel for was to integrate into the region, dominate, have a greater Israel project, which was always the greater military industrial complex project to destabilize the region. Now, remember how the military works. And if you don't know how this works, let me tell you. Speak to other people on the wrong side of these bombs. And I used to work in investment banking, and I know how such deals are constructed. The first thing, the bent slide understanding, is that the military industrial complex, the MIC, they don't want peace. They definitely don't want peace. They are not defending anyone. They want bombs to continually be flying. They want proxies like Israel to continually buying and purchasing the money that was stolen by the money printer from the average American person. They want a continual supply of new innovation and new toys so that they can use it in laboratories. And Palestine was a laboratory for testing genocide as a service, occupation as a service, manufacturing covert operations to have extreme governments that are allowed to be funded. Are you telling me that Mossad, the most sophisticated tunnel, intelligence agency in the world, deeply integrated with the CIA and MI6, didn't know that Hamas were building a tunnel network? And they didn't know that October the 7th was going to happen? And they just accidentally allowed the money to get through via Qatar and via Iran? And they just happened to create the competing factions or proxies? No, that's exactly how these operations work. And we know that from many of the declassified documents I've gone through in the past, whether it's Iran-Contra, whether it's Operation Ajax, whether it's Operation Gladio, whether it's any of these operations that you can go through and read the book Covert Regime Change if you want to understand how these things work. But anyway, these are laboratories. These are brochures. And Israel is a laboratory for all the illegal stuff that the MIC can't do within America because they want to distance themselves from the genocide and just hire a militia to do it. That's what Israel's always been. So every single explosion is essentially a sales pitch for the MIC, for the Proof of Weapons Network. They like to showcase them. They want them to be filmed. They put them in a pitch deck. They explain the operations. Palantir very proudly shares what they've done in Israel, what they've done in Gaza. Every single casualty is really just a proof of concept for something that's going to lead to something they can pitch to the board of directors. That's how it works. I mean, this is the real world of how this mafia network works. And they're using your pension in order to invest in it. They create laboratories everywhere. They created a ginormous laboratory in Syria. They created a currency war and destroyed everyone's savings and laden Lebanon with IMF debt. They created, killed 1 million in Iraq, civilians, destroyed the country, left it for ruins. Used Halliburton in order to get all those contracts. And then they'll tell you that this was a mistake. No, the goal is not to win the war. The goal is to sell the weapons and rebuild and get the service contracts to prop up the market, to create demand for the dollar. So when an ally like Saddam Hussein wants to price their oil in euros, he's no longer an ally and he's no longer complying. So you kill people. And then you fund both sides of Iraq-Iran war. You give Iraq chemical weapons. And then on the Iran side, you have a weapons trafficking network in order to do covert operations and drug trafficking operations in Latin America, Iran-Contra affair. I've covered these. I don't want to cover them again. Anyway, all of these different operations are just basically testing grounds for their different types of gadgets that they want to sell. And Palantir was built, all the surveillance technology that was utilized in Gaza. Of course, they knew October the 7th was going to happen. Or across Israel right now, you've got people asking that question. And when the war comes to an end, that question needs to be answered. When it's answered, that may be the civil unrest campaign to change the leadership with the GCC puppet and the Turkey puppet, or the regional model that will eventually asset strip the hell out of Israel and rebuild Gaza. And it will be controlled by, regional players that don't want violence in the region. This is the cost to get the American empire out of your region and allow you to live in peace. A ceasefire is not good. It means that you've got idle factories, you've got idle weapons, you've got, diminishing revenue, diminishing lines. They need to be sold somewhere else. Like the stock price needs to continue going up. If the stock price doesn't go up, then investors stop investing. You've got your 3-month cycle. It means that if prices drop, then the executives' share options don't get exercised. They get to borrow less against their stock, and they get to be subordinated into the network. So they've got the model worked either way. They hedge it through derivatives contracts. So they just go push operations. When they don't work, they make money in the failure of the operation. When it does work, they make money in the success of the operation. So every single city, every single area is just for them. Like, so these are the same operations that are going to be done within the West. They've got weapons that they built that can be used and manufactured specifically for going in children's hands. They'd love a weapon in every single hand, just like a business would want to not employ anyone if they could and just have full AI. They want every single country to go to war if they could, and every single country can become a customer. That's how these companies work. And it's all paid for in the name of national security. They manufacture all the wars. They manufacture civil unrest to justify the wars. And if you go through my blog, I go through operation after operation, just actually going through the FBI documents and the cover-up operations. Now, just selling and stockpiling is not enough revenue, so you have to manufacture more. When you're stockpiling, you need to always create an arms race. And an arms race is what is being created in the artificial intelligence side right now. They need inventory to move. They need it to continually move. They want purchases, and orders. They don't mind if America has no national security left. That's the problem of America. They want to keep selling. And if they can't sell, then they'll do something at home to make sure they can sell. BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, do you think these people care? Do you think they count the bodies? They've been doing this for decades and decades. That's why these blackmail operations exist. They just see the quarterly report that they need to meet every quarter in order to increase the revenue in their game. And the politicians just see the 4-month cycle and the 4-year cycle and the 2-year cycle, and the fact that they have to meet their goals of their lobbies. And we're calling this democracy, where the people actually matter. This is how the empire works. And the history that was always hidden is going to be rewritten from the rising empires. They're going to be sharing their stories that were always oppressed. So the way that the military industrial complex works in this proof of weapons network that backs up the dollar, when the shooting stops, they have to negotiate with the rebuild contracts. And so the financial industrial complex, they swoop in and they look at what deals they can do in order to rebuild. What are the rebuild contracts? What are the software as a services for the technology side? This just becomes the military profits were just a setup for the FIC. And then it's reconstruction, and that's where it moves over to next. The only way that you can actually stop the mix is to satisfy them that you can actually put together a better deal, because MIC actually owns FIC shares as well. And so they had to hedge so that when they go through this, at least they benefit. And you have to show in a presentation, you know, how this will make more money by the rebuild and ending the war. You have to demonstrate it. You have to do a cost benefit analysis. You have to do, you know, what superior returns you can achieve, what dividends can be achieved, what share price can be achieved by allowing peace to be achieved. Right now, it is an absolute miracle that the Middle East has actually found itself in this position where, after a century of destabilization, it has actually found a set of circumstances where it's able to negotiate a military-industrial complex exit. That's a miracle. And so when something like this happens, yes, it makes me want to puke. But it also means that the old operations come into an end. And the old operation only comes to an end when a new operation starts. And the new operation starts is what they're pitching for investment. And when they're pitching as investment, as grotesque as it is, it means that the investors will want the set of circumstances that mean that their investment is okay. So what was October the 7th all along? Well, the way this actually works is the way that leadership works. You think you've got democracies, right? Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, democracy, as we know, is code word for corporate capture, because it's only the money that determines who the leaders are. And so what you would do typically is you would put a job description out there. Like Netanyahu would have received and picked up a job description through these covert mechanisms and compromised power network. And the job description, I'm being a bit facetious, but it will say something along the lines of kill as many Palestinians as possible and transform this American colony, because now we want to do business with the Middle East and Gulf states, into a legitimate state. And in order to make it a legitimate state, we can't have it being an apartheid anymore. And so there's a couple of ways that you can do it. You can just get rid of all the Palestinians and chuck them into Egypt and in the Sinai Desert. And we'll make sure that we pay Egypt, bribe money, load them up with IMF debt, destroy their currency, regime change them, do an Arab Spring to change the leadership, destabilize so that they are forced into submission. And we'll do the same with Jordan, and we'll do the same with all of the neighbors as well, with Lebanon as well. And at the same time, we'll allow resistance and uprisings by alternative factions like Muslim Brotherhood to persist. And then when they persist, we'll also create our own proxies from all of the victims of the Iraqi war, and we'll put them in ISIS training camps, and we'll create a resistance so that all of those can fight against each other too. And we'll make it out like they're doing it for religious reasons, when they've been manufactured and radicalized on purpose to maintain the cash flows and continually destabilize. And our media can be weaponized in order to change the narrative of what's actually happening. so that we can radicalize the Americans through operations like 9/11 into joining the army and engaging in the missions where they believe that they have justice in order to do it. And that's how this works. And this is the only reason that we're getting a change right now, is because the financial industrial complex has made that presentation and partnered with the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund and said, we need access to those funds. And so therefore, let's switch the model and let's change the model. And so what they do anyway, Netanyahu at some point would have taken that agenda on, and somebody would have taken that agenda on. You know, for example, when they're recruiting for destabilization campaigns, somebody that came from the Iraqi war would have taken on the mission, said, yeah, I'll recruit the army and I'll do that for you. And then the covert operation happens. And what they happen is they have a contract. And that contract is like a mafia. It's like a henchman. The manager will say, I'll take on that mission and I have to deliver. And if I don't deliver, I'm taken out of the network. Trump accepted a mission for the financial industrial complex. And in between his two elections, there were two warning messages that were sent at him. And I believe those warning messages in those assassination attempts were, make sure you switch to a multipolar world for the financial industrial complex. He's doing it. That's why the world got tariffs. That's why all these negotiations are happening. Starmer, Merz, Macron, they were told that they need to take their country's budget, buy US weapons, manufacture consent, pretending they're defending democracy, and create the type of environment to destroy Europe and vassalize Europe and UK into the BlackRock and the Blackstone and the networks. They took that job. And their job is to do it through whatever means necessary. And the more compromised they are, the better. And they get to do corrupt deals in the background, and they prefer corruption. Why do they prefer corruption? So that you're incentivized not to deviate from the power structure. And if anyone deviates from it, like JFK did in the US, or Trump may have in between the different elections, maybe, you know, he went in a different direction. Or how about Yasser Rabin, which was a leader in Israel that decided he wanted to work for normalization with Palestine, and that, you know, there was a better path and a better strategy that involved peace rather than continuing the flow of military industrial complex profits. What do? They get assassinated. They get taken out. And then what do? They advertise again, and someone comes along and says, I'll take the job. This is the mafia network that runs this. You call it the deep state. Trump ain't taking on the deep state. Trump was subordinated into this power structure, which is why he's allowed to play president right now, because he's complying. Then eventually, rather than Yasser Rabin, you end up with someone like Netanyahu, who's psychopathic enough to do whatever it takes, or compromise enough to do whatever it takes. And so Israel, US, Qatar, they're all groomed, they're all weaponized, they all have military bases. And what do? They allow for a leadership in Gaza like Hamas to persist. And then they strategically can continue having the justification for firing the weapons, mowing the lawn, continually selling more weapons and justifying how the revenue still flows. They can manage their rise in power. They can take them out with military operations, but they want them to always persist. The more radicalized, the more extreme, the better, because that justifies the increase of the revenue and the cash keeps flowing. You can create a narrative at home that makes the American people kind of say, okay, well, we're evangelical Christians. We need to bring back the Messiah and we need to protect the Jews. And if you bless Israel, then you'll be blessed. So religion is weaponized in order to justify the military-industrial complex revenue. When you read the book by Paul Williams, Operation Gladio, it shows how the Vatican, the CIA, the Nazis, the terrorists, how they were all integrated into these drug trafficking, human trafficking, and weapons trafficking operations. Trump ain't coming after the drugs networks. The covert operations are all funded through these networks, and they're enforced and allowed to happen through governments. And so, America will always have covert operations with Iran, with Turkey, a different version with Saudi, a different version with UAE. There's no escaping from any of this stuff. You just have these different flavors of it. And because America is the global hegemon and the Soviet Union obviously fell, then you no longer have competing sides. And this is what happened after the 1991. And when America came off the gold standard and we went into that fiat currency standard that backed up the current proof of weapons network. And so, whenever the strategy shift or things go wrong, that creates a new manager that can just be wiped out or taken out. And so suddenly you get an announcement from Trump, yeah, we're doing some strategic strikes on ISIS, or we're taking out Qasem Soleimani or anything like that. Now, when they want to do it just by a strategic strike, they can. And yet when they want to level the whole of Gaza, oh, right, Hamas are in the tunnels and they're using everyone as human shields, and therefore we must blow up everything so we can take out all of the history, rebuild it, and build back better. And now we can go find the investors to build it as well. And we're shareholders in all the different companies that are going to benefit from this. And sometimes people need to be eliminated because they join, the faction of power that is not serving the function anymore. And so that's why you have these strategic strikes and different operations. That makes money. The manager gets to navigate, and they have to leverage wherever they can. So what have we seen with Netanyahu? He knows that when this war comes to an end, he faces the court cases, the ICJ cases, the internal corruption cases, and the fact that the military no longer needs him. So he needs to always make himself useful. And now now that the order has changed, he originally couldn't get Egypt to agree to the ethnic cleansing because Egypt started to defy. Why did Egypt start to defy? Because the IMF became less significant and China started to invest in Egypt. And China grew where many of the countries in the region were dependent upon China. And so you had reverse IMF. And through financial transactions, you had countries that were able to defy what they were originally installed to achieve. And so regions started to unify against Netanyahu. They started to co-opt the financial industrial complex. You had the Gulf sovereign wealth funds that were partnering in every single deal. You had what looked like Iran changing its role, changing its expansion of the proxy networks. And you started to witness a change in the region. Now, it's no accident that we had a weakening of Hezbollah. We had a weakening of Hamas. And Saudi is now weakening the Houthis in Yemen because Iran's no longer playing divide and conquer. And so when we moved to the 12-day war, it was pretty obvious that this was orchestrated in order to achieve a strategic narrative where America got to say they took out the nuclear program. Iran got to say we defended ourselves from the strikes, preemptive strikes from Israel. Israel got to take out IRGC hardliners, that probably those in board with reform are okay with it. And Khamenei, in survival mode right now, is complying with the network. America needs to push up all of this narrative. Military makes more the more deep it gets. You get to do a currency war. You get to destroy the savings of the Iranian people. You get to have civil unrest. And in that civil unrest, you get to do a blackout. And in that blackout, maybe it's taking out the Mossad agents. Maybe some of the Mossad agents that weren't playing along were causing what happened in Operation Ajax, where MI6 and CIA were killing people and then blaming it on the leader. Maybe the IRGC, with an uprising against the military, is of course going to put that. What maybe people in the West were encouraging the Iranians to uprise, knowing that, or they just ignorant, that the only time a revolution happens is when the military and the people get to convert the military. So if you're asking the people to uprise against the military, of course they're going to get killed. And that's the lunacy and craziness. And across spaces, we have people engaging in propaganda, paid in order to push a narrative, make people think that this has got something to do with feminism and women's rights and peace and all that type of stuff. These are the covert operations that people may not even know that they're useful idiots to do. But what we're witnessing right now is the integration of every single proxy by the powers, because all the powers have agreed. And narrative to make you think it's going to World War III. And that's why I can, with a degree of confidence, say that the fact that they are pitching this border peace, this is not the border peace. This is the outlet valve for what all the regional powers that have decolonized from the dollar have managed to negotiate with the financial industrial complex, while they're trading regions that are going to be war zones, because they need to give something to the military to have peace in their country. That's the empire. The dollar wasn't natural. It was the same thing that backed the pound. So anyway, I'm happy to see that despite how much it makes me want to puke, that after decades and decades of divide and conquer, manufactured forever wars, weaponization of religions, trying to create divide, conquer, that things changed just because China became a competing superpower. And now the US has to exit the region because it got vassalized into its own financial industrial complex, and the FIC has now turned against the people and its country, and the country is no longer sovereign. It created this monster. So US is now in energy independent, so we know that that changes the game. They're now an exporter of energy, so they're using the military to enforce energy exports on Ukraine, on Europe, on utilizing Venezuela to make up for some of the de-dollarization. Maybe they get tether penetration. Maybe they do currency wars where they destroy the savings of everyone in Latin and Central America to push their regional dollarization, while they sanction, so that confiscate some of the, like they did in Venezuela, some of the tether, so that no one else in the world uses it, so you can continue the weakening of the dollar. Maybe China and BRICS have actually become the primary energy purchaser, which is what's happening right now. And so don't you think that changes everything? Like the people that still think Israel rule the world, do you think China wants a US destabilizing force for the US military to exist? No, they want integration. And China, who's propping up the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund, that's propping up with the financial industrial complex, will be using their leverage to dump Israel for the MiC and instead acquire it bit by bit by bit. And so you're going to see more and more debt in Israel. You're going to see the Palestine plan that requires the investment with regional stability. And you're going to see a model for what they want to export around the world on the technical side. And it's all dependent on national capital. And when you follow the money, you can see where this is going. Everyone else is going crazy, thinking that Israel is about to be the new empire with Pax Judaica that I was debating Professor Xian and various others on Spaces all the time. But everyone thought the ethnic cleansing would happen. I knew it wouldn't happen. It was meant to happen, but Netanyahu failed because Egypt aligned with the other forces and China started investing. So that's how you can do it with the sovereign wealth funds. This is why I focus on sovereign, you as an individual, you as your company. Because how do they get your company? They get it through Silicon Valley and taking your company public and bank debt. How do they get your country? By not allowing you to have a sovereign wealth fund, using a central bank that's a member of the Bank for International Settlements, currency wars, and covert operations. That's how they get the countries. How do you defend against it? Well, look at the lesson. They did it with sovereign wealth funds. Countries and companies are able to defend by utilizing the resources. And this is a PSYOP, and you can do that as an individual too. And this is the point that I'd like everyone to learn and why I'm going through this whole story. Basically, the FIC pitched the MiC and said, here's a model of how we can end the forever war and move to a new phase, and here's why we should do it. And guess what? It can happen. So suddenly, one by one, the GCC, it currently, originally, before this, it would always view Iran as a threat to regional stability. Israel was always viewed, has viewed Iran as a mixed revenue opportunity. So they never wanted to take out Iran, and they wanted Iran to expand its proxies, and they wanted to weaponize and make sure anti-Semitism persists so that they can fear people into joining the army. And then by having these radical groups that they recruit and manufacture, you radicalize the Jewish people to join the army and do ethnic cleansing, which is the job description that Netanyahu accepted. Now, what do? What's the narrative? They say that Saudi is a bootlicker to Israel. Now, Saudi did a deal with America, and they're trying to free themselves from the proxy Israel. And so that requires a degree of diplomacy. And Western media will frame it as this is just a proxy. Of course, they have to engage in joint operations because both of them saw Iran as a threat. It doesn't mean that one's a bootlicker for the other. We've got to have a bit more nuance in here. They both exist as independent players, and they both have, they both had vision. For the military-industrial complex, Israel wanted the Greater Israel Project. Saudi wanted to be a regional stability player in the region. Iran wanted to expand its proxies in order to become the hegemon in the region. And so you had this three-player game that was perfect for the military-industrial complex, which is why the West would always fuel it and fuel any type of new powers that came along, new factions. So, you had this game where, the Gulf was aligned with FIC, Israel was aligned with MiC, and both of them had a common enemy because MiC was happy, but Israel had its own aspirations as well. And so everyone's trying to become the hegemon in the Middle East, and more divide and conquer is ushered through the control of the media as well. And meanwhile, people are just dying, and people are being told that they're just crazy people, and they fall further and further behind. And of course, people are radicalized in this process. What would you do if your wife was blown up, if your grandma was blown up, if your children were blown up? Wouldn't you buy into the recruitment of the people that say they're going to avenge? But at the top, they're serving greater powers, monetary power. Underneath, they're manufactured into an ideology that makes them think that they're serving a different type of mission to what they are. And so what did Saudi do eventually? Well, Saudi, would build its own networks. And you had these Wahhabi networks that led to ISIS and various other things, so that they could fight up against the proxies that were manufactured. Like, you see where this all goes. Religion is just being weaponized, and media is just weaponized. And everything you're seeing right now is still the same thing. And they pay influencers. And Elon is compromised into the network, executing regime change for greater power. Israel continually seeks to escalate with Iran, because that was the only way to justify Israel in the first place. It was the only way to justify making sure that more money was printed and more weapons were sold. And then they get the Greater Israel Project as a justification for creating these Palestinian laboratories and these Lebanese laboratories and these Yemenis laboratories, so that they can test more and more and more, and these West Bank laboratories. That makes them a good client. And that's what they need to do. And if the weapons stop selling, they need to come up with another model, as we said. So this is what we're witnessing right now. And I believe that GCC is now able to exert its dominance over the Middle East. And Israel is going to have to integrate. GCC are a good client to the financial industrial complex. They're getting them those deals. Iran's axis in Lebanon and all these other regions, that was how they got their influence. And this is what we've been seeing in the region. You weren't told that story because you didn't follow the money. You listened to the politicians and you listened to the media instead. And there's all levels of corruption. Like, you're told, people think that this is just resistance. No, this is countries acting in their own self-interest and using proxies and using media in order to shift narrative. The whole thing is horrible. And it's what, it's what has been led to the death and destruction to back up the dollar, to gain access to resources. It's why you can have a situation, which I've covered in the past as well, where the leader of ISIS is the current Syrian president. Why? Because they're given a job mission. Originally, their job mission was to destabilize and create carnage in Syria. And they did that. And Iran resisted against it. And then Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani, who was the Iran proxy that was creating the resistance group that were fighting against ISIS, that create the whole destabilization. So now you can pay more. So Turkey and the GCC can hire the same group and say, let's rebrand a faction of them, call them HTS, and they can come in and they can stabilize Syria. And so now Turkey and the GCC can fund them to create a rebel movement. And what happened? Why was that so easy? Why did it lead to the overthrow of Assad? It's because all regional powers had agreed. Russia had agreed, Iran had agreed, Turkey had agreed. The US military has agreed that we're managing this transition. They would have negotiated how many weapon sales and how the demilitarization process will work. And they would also hedge it with the derivatives, and they'd have a partnership they'd have a different mission with Israel. And they'd say, whichever mission succeeds is the one we'll go for. Israel didn't succeed. And, that's how these different types of operations work. This is the game. And you can read declassified documents, but it's when you follow the money that you can put it all together and figure out the whole thing. It also gives, by doing it via proxy, plausible deniability, so that when the genocide case comes along, you can say it was just them. So that it doesn't come back to suing the companies that were providing the weapons. That's why it's always done via these proxies as well. So, of course, the GCC doesn't want the Greater Israel Project like it's being portrayed in the media, and they're just bootlickers. And that's why people can't get it right, because they're following headlines and media and what politicians are saying. What does the Gulf country actually want for Israel? It wants it to be foreign direct investment. They want to acquire it. So they set up a game of good cop, bad cop. UAE joins Abraham Accords and normalizes with Israel. They look like the bad cop. They're the demons, right? They're also doing the Muslim Brotherhood side. So Muslim Brotherhood makes it look like they're not the Muslim ones. But meanwhile, they're giving more power to their sovereign wealth fund as all the millionaires and billionaires leave the UK and go over to Dubai. And so UAE just looks like a complete traitor. But UAE is going to be acquiring Israel in the end because they're in Abraham Accords and they can acquire the assets. The war, the 12-day war, makes them more distressed. The stock market goes up, the economy gets worse, the debt is burdened onto the people. That's the same thing that's happening in UK. That's the same thing that's happening in America. That's the same thing that's happening in Europe. That's the same thing that's happening in Israel because it's being manufactured in order to happen that way. Saudi, they get to look like good cop. They're the ones that saying, I'm not going to normalize with Israel and I'm going to prevent any wars happening. I'm going to have to work with the US when I have to work with the US. But now, because China's more important, I'm going to be normalizing with Iran and we're going to be coordinating on how we reach regional stability. Iran plays the anti-Israel role. The proxies are radicalized into thinking they are resisting, but really it's serving imperial powers. Previously, it was done in Afghanistan between Russia, the Soviet Union, and America, but now it's being done between America and China. But China wants regional stability, and America has been co-opted into regional stability by negotiating with the FIC as well. None of it was really, I don't think, I can't place judgment on this, but this is what countries do when acting in their own self-interest. Were any of them doing it for Palestine? Probably not. It's a convenient thing to happen. But that illegal occupation created the narrative to continually justify everything that needed to happen next. But that led to Israel being exposed as an apartheid state. And so the job description was put out. For decades, basically, Iran's strategy was to have the proxy networks, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Iraq side, and the Houthis in Yemen, and then be able to leverage that to negotiate a better transaction. And then eventually, they won't be backed by weapons and funding. And once the money dries up, the ideology either integrates or is no longer useful. Basically, the Axis projected Iranian power. And that's just a reality. That's a survival mechanism. But the divide and conquer is ending right now. And so Iran's actions always push Israel's actions and the US actions towards escalation. But really, what was the threat of that? They knew that it was essentially a winner-takes-all mission because they could end up allowing Israel to have the justification to create the Greater Israel Project and become the predominant hegemon. The GCC doesn't want that. So this is the interesting dynamics. They don't want, they want Israel to just be a normal player in the region, be strategically weakened and acquired. And so what happens next? The GCC can partner with Iran. And that's what's happening right now. The GCC doesn't want the Greater Israel Project. Iran doesn't want the Greater Israel Project. And, none of the, and the GCC don't want Iranian supremacy either. And so you end up with the practicality. So where people think, all right, Hezbollah are going to come back, Hamas are going to come back, Iran won't sell out. This is practicality. This is reality. Now, what happened with the sanctions? It vassalized Iran into China. So 90% of the oil in Iran is purchased by China. Do you think China wants Israel to be a force for US military power? Of course it doesn't. So now the role has changed, and we have to change it based upon following the money. And that's the reality of where we are right now. And this is what I want people to understand, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to figure out what might be happening next. Now, as we speak right now, we're being told that there's a military buildup in Iran, or US is deploying, USS Abraham, big ginormous warships and stuff like that. Do we really think that when the GCC don't want the war, when Israel has now essentially become a paid for rent to eliminate the Hezbollah hardliners and build back better for the financial industrial complex, and Iran is not reacting to that, could it just be that everything we're seeing is theater again? Well, I'm pretty sure we are. I'm pretty sure that that's what's happening. And I'm pretty sure that this is not America growing or showing strength. This is the full vassalization of America into the FIC and a new world order being set. And that's why I think the border peace is a significant event. That's why I'm not happy with what's actually happening. This is not what I'd advocate for. But after the 2 years that we've watched and everything that we've seen, I'm happy that this is coming to an end, and this is actually going to be something. There's no justice. Don't think the Palestinians are going to own their land. But how else could this have been stopped? Everyone else was saying, go to war, escalate, go further, become more aggressive. That's what they wanted. That's what the MIC wanted. And that's the reality today. So I believe what is happening right now is that Iran, for regime survival, vassalized into dependency upon China, is giving some of its ideological side. It's basically about survival right now, and that makes sense. That's not a sellout, as people will frame it. Some people will frame it. People like to use these stupid words because they can't get through the nuance as well. So anyway, I believe everyone's on the same team at this stage right now. There is a slight nuance in there, which is that there are negotiations, and Israel used to give power to MIC, but now we need to get rid of these weapons. So maybe the next theater is by having a back and forth, another back and forth between Iran and Israel, all of the weapons go. Then you enter into de-weaponization, maybe denuclearization. I don't know exactly what the plan is, but I know that it's not what people think it is. And it's all because of China and BRICS diplomacy, which were aligned with the Gulf sovereign wealth funds, and them all working together as a team to end divide and conquer. And now there is no need for proxies. So proxies can integrate or be eliminated. And I believe that that's what we're witnessing. And maybe there's been some escalation right now. Hezbollah leadership were taken out, all the different things. Assad was taken out, and he wasn't taken out. He was put to Russia because Russia agreed. Everybody agreed. Now, this is what I think people need to understand. We are not witnessing chaos. We are witnessing coordination on a scale that we've never seen before. And there needs to be some kind of off ramps, because people need to maintain their narrative as these things happen. And that's what I think we'll get another version of the 12-day war, as I said before. And I think during that blackout, I think the people that were taken out, plus some aggression, but please don't be a useful idiot for telling average Iranian people to come up against the military, because you will be sending someone to their grave in that scenario, because there's bigger operations that are happening here. And there's different factions of power that may not be on board the mission that need to be eliminated in order to get to this board of peace outcome that we're going to see in the end. Okay. So, what is the board of peace? I wrote some notes on it. Let me see if I can get there. At the final part as well. Right. That's why I believe that October the 7th was allowed to happen. That's why when you go to my blog on SimonDixon.com and type in atrocity, you'll see all the manufactured lies and how the media was weaponized. Violence does happen, but it happened for a reason, because it was allowed to happen. And we know that Hannibal Directive was deployed and Apache helicopters, Israeli IDF Apache helicopters did kill their own people. We know that because the war minister admitted it and said that it happened. And so if you're still pushing those narratives, and we know that there were lies about 40 beheaded babies, understand that that happened because it was meant to happen, because Israel and the US MiC are doing what they always do. And they're willing to do it on their own people, which is why they're willing to do that on their own people in the civil unrest campaigns at home right now. I'm not saying it's going to get that bad. You won't go through 99% of what the rest of the world went through. You'll get 1% of it, but people are freaking out around the 1% at the moment as well. And so the job description was failed, and Netanyahu has changed his role. Right. So what is Trump's board of peace? Given the background and the history and everything I wanted to go, and I know these are long videos, but I create AI summaries. If you didn't notice, if you didn't get to watch any of my long form content, we create blogs. I put the long form content, and then we do an AI summary underneath so that you can get a TLDR and a shorter one. I like to do all the detail so that we've documented this, so I can feed it into the AI, and I can also have this documentation of what's happening in real time. And we're building our own, sort of decentralized infrastructure, running our own LLMs in case these get censored out. That's the resistance, by the way. We build back by owning our assets in self-custody, by boycotting the networks, by running our own LLMs in decentralized structures. So what is the board of peace? The board of peace is essentially the negotiations of America's own retreat from a unipolar power. And it needs to be framed as strength while it's retreating into a regional power. It's got nothing to do with peace. Peace is like a side impact of what's already been negotiated, because the MiC is allowing for peace. And this is essentially the US shedding its commitments and its costly commitments, and its propping up of its proxies, while maintaining the appearance of strength and looking good. And so a peace board, essentially, it gives, it kind of gives some noble face to this mission while they're building back better based upon the war zones that they effectively created. The real fact is that the FIC essentially traded the stability, and this is just the narrative as a result of it, because capital flows are going to be restructured. And when the FIC want to restructure, just like they're doing in Syria right now, they like to create a bit of carnage so that everyone else is negotiating on bad terms, but they get the best terms. And so that model will be followed in every war zone. In order to get leverage, they take their proxies and they give the ability to get the best terms, and then they can manage their liquidity accordingly, and that will all be done via the border peace. And the border peace will be profiting from every single Rebuild Better program, and they will be selling it to investors. And Jared Kushner will be pretending that people are doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Nothing they say is real. Everything is a lie. Everything is narrative. But we're entering into a world where effectively, for the very first time in our lifetime, in our generation's lifetime, the MIC, the military industrial complex, is going to be taking a backdoor step. And so why do you think Trump came out and said we need to invest $1.5 trillion? And why do you think he carteled the bonuses? Because he needs them to innovate into artificial intelligence and cybersecurity and space warfare and everything that Elon Musk said that they should be doing in order to put go up to the moon and win the space wars and the next Cold Wars that they'll manufacture the narrative of, that they need to win space and then they need to win Mars. And so, the military is going for the less profitable model. So now more money needs to be printed and more debt needs to be created, and they need to roll over the national debt in order to spend more. The profit share center is essentially moving from conflict to post-conflict reconstruction. It's the Build Back Better business model. And instead of weaponizing proxies, they're doing arms maintenance contracts. And they'll actually have a security architecture that deals with, regional partners, and the countries will be negotiating, build your data centers here, because we don't want a dependency upon you. And so the data centers are being built in the regions where the sovereign wealth funds have negotiation power. Is basically a legitimacy room and a bunch of people that are going to profit from everything. A place where you get to kind of wrap it up in a noble cause, and everyone that's already negotiated their deals, they get an off-ramp. They can go and say, oh, the only reason we negotiated peace is because Trump forced it on us. And Trump gets to look like he's creating world peace when all the breakthroughs have already happened through all the regional powers already. Anyone that needs to hedge, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Russia, Turkey, they can now simply say, all right, it was Trump exerting his leverage through the border peace. And now you've got an off-ramp to get to what has already been negotiated. Now, I don't think Ukraine-Russia ends anytime soon, but you have a mechanism for when all the profits are dried up, when all the money is printed over the next 3 years during the Trump administration, you get to squeeze everything you can and then say, yeah, it was Trump applying pressure. And so you needed theatrical things like what happened in Venezuela and what's about to happen in Greenland in order to project the power when the reality is the empire is shrinking. The FIC is weakening the dollar, and the MIC is exiting all of those regions and negotiating as much as they can. And it's the technology that's being used in order to build the data centers, and everyone is flipping the whole world upside down in order to get that energy together. And that's what we covered in part 1 in the technology side. So everyone thinks that the US has become stronger by taking out Venezuela, by taking out Greenland. They'll also have their part of Ukraine. And really, it is regional. And that changes. This marks the US downsizing, and this marks the multipolar world order. And the second, the linchpin of it, is by having the security forces in Gaza that officially ends the Greater Israel Project. That will then lead to a flurry of similar deals in Sudan, in Libya, in Lebanon, the whole region, North Africa, MENA, and because that is the exit. And I, quite frankly, am looking forward to seeing that so that everyone can see how this actually happened. And I wanted to document how these things actually worked, because you're going to be fed a very different story of what's actually happening here. But anyway, it allows for all this peace to be packaged up as diplomacy. It gives everyone the good feelings, but the withdrawals are going to happen because the military is taking a step back and have been given other things to do. And that's what the border peace is. Trump will continue to perfectly extract for the financial industrial complex as he has all along. And that means that America will be further and further vassalized into this power structure through the K-shaped economy, as will Europe, as will the West, as will everything that we've been covering. And I personally believe that there'll be massive knock-on effects. I think the Middle East being able to unify around its own energy with manufacturing based in China and purchasing US innovation is going to create one of the highest growth areas. Now, imagine all the people that migrated away from a war zone, ended up in the West, and when their country was about to grow, they stayed in the West when the MIC was coming home and manufacturing civil unrest in the West. That's the type of sickness that happens here. So make it a win-win deal. Many people in the West don't want the migrants, the growth sectors happening at home. Don't get fooled. Don't go for a double whammy. Don't come to the West when the West is being colonized by itself in the financial industrial complex. And I think everyone's happy with that deal. Now, when you've got peace in the Middle East, and that leads to North Africa and the MENA region being able to rebuild under these new reconstruction models, the finance companies are incentivized. You're going to get a lot of the resources that are needed for all of this AI and robotics and data centers. But what happens to Africa and other regions? Well, I think that the global South in general, across Asia and Africa, will continue the Belt and Road Initiative because it's now allowed to. And I think that China, Russia, America, MIC, all of the powers, Iran, Turkey, all of them, have all agreed on what regions are going to be split. I think the MIC said that they'll get Europe and Latin America. And so what do? We enter the World Economic Forum. And everything that we've been preparing people by following the money rather than listening to the media is being really conclusively communicated through riddles and lies in the World Economic Forum. So now I'm going to conclude everything that we put together here. And thank you all for staying this long. And hopefully the AI summaries will break it down for you. But I would officially like to welcome you with the border peace to the multipolar world order. This is not theory anymore. It is a reality. US artificial intelligence will power the Western Hemisphere, and more energy in every form possible. Whatever needs to happen will usher in that 1984 Orwellian nightmare stablecoin standard integrated into social credit scores, artificial intelligence, and you fight back with decentralized artificial intelligence. They need energy. They need rare earth minerals. They need chips. They need commodities. And every single area will adjust to the reality of the AI arms race that is the narrative that's being pushed. Even the Federal Reserve monetary policy might be given to BlackRock just to make sure that it goes into capital rather than any type of conservatism. The entire West will be asset stripped for fictic Mick. And Norway sovereign wealth funds and the financial industry, the FIC, will basically asset strip Europe. That will lead that operation. I think Venezuela will be dollarized through stable coins, but regionally, more currency warfare across Latin America in order to have regional dollarization. And then they'll be vassalized into US to provide all those resources. The people won't get any help there. Ukraine will eventually be negotiated. I think there's more to go. I don't think it's happening anytime soon. Split between the FIC and Russia. Russia is going to be hedging between India and China to make sure that this can continue. And the MIC will sacrifice as many Ukrainians for as long as they can get this narrative to continue. And Russians will be sacrificed as well. Don't believe any of the hype. And what did we see this week? We saw the most likely problem will be between the two Indo-China powers. Half the world's, 3 billion people over between Indo and China. So how did the Gulf countries and other powers make an environment that makes all of that work? Well, you saw that there was a theatrical war or escalation between UAE and Saudi. I covered this one last week. Saudi ended up controlling Yemen, which I believe UAE had agreed to. UAE ended up getting its port in Somaliland to control the Red Sea. Turkey ended up getting its resources in Somalia and its ports in the Red Sea. And UAE, Saudi, and Turkey, and Iran eventually, as it goes into the Strait of Hormuz, which I believe in this upcoming operation, Khamenei will stay because he's cooperating in whatever we get next. They've all figured out the ports and the routes. And now America can slowly exit into these negotiations and give the FIC as much as it wants. And those bases become less and less important for destabilization campaigns. And so to keep India and China aligned, what happened next? Well, we saw that a pact was signed between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. Pakistan, a military power to compete with Israel's nuclear. Pakistan also a nuclear. And Turkey, a very capable NATO army with Saudi Arabia. And likely Egypt will join that, another very capable militarized force. Who's Pakistan enemy that Trump claims that he negotiated peace with, which was more likely China, because China has resources in Pakistan and China has rivalries with India, but also Russia was providing many of those weapons and India was building their own manufacturing base. So BRICS is what unified that: Russia, China, India. But of course, Trump was trying to get the Nobel Peace Prize, which instead went to Machado Maria in Venezuela because she was meant to be a part of the regime change. Something may have gone wrong there. We'll see. But in response, UAE normalized with India, another nuclear power. So now you got Israel's nukes. You got UAE normalized with India with a security pact. And you got Saudi and Turkey security pact with Pakistan. And most of these countries are on the border peace. So it's pretty nice. It seems to work quite well for me. Anyone still think that Al-Aqsa Mosque is going to make Israel the superpower of the world? That's why in that debate I said, I don't think that's going to happen. And if it does, it means my analysis is wrong or there's something that I haven't seen because that would just destabilize the region. Maybe it's a part of the plan, maybe not. I'll keep reviewing and I'll cover every single week anyway. But now the shipping routes have been handed over. The foundation to protect them by the region is is happening, and America gets its own roots with the Greenland, the Ukraine, and the Venezuelan axis. And there's the nuclearization that can allow such a thing to happen. Chinese AI will likely go renewable with all of their solar panels that Elon was talking about. There may be a narrative to spend more of that $1.5 trillion around space wars, the next civil war that they'll create, maybe between Russia and America, that will justify it. All of that renewable energy will be deployed that Elon was talking about. Gulf energy will be deployed. Russian energy will be deployed as well. Iran will be vassalized into China, and then normalization will eventually happen between the GCC, I believe, and those port routes for Iran's gas pipelines that we talked about as well. And that is how you get to, they can circumvent, they can make up for the sanctions through the BRICS corridors as well. And this was all the results. This is why competition is good. This is why multipolarity is good. Now, when there's no world reserve currency, what tends to help people? Well, people that can hold Bitcoin in self-custody. People that can, central banks are using gold. We know the problems and the limitations of gold. Silver's become industrial commodity. But commodities is why commodities are going crazy right now. But in multipolarity, there's only one global digital currency that has diversified hash power based upon energy upon all the regional players that are mining, and that's Bitcoin. Nothing else competes with that. The crypto scam is part of the surveillance state. That's the programmable money, PSYOP. Bitcoin was a gateway drug into central bank digital currencies and stablecoins. But the elites, they won't. What happened in Clarity Act? Self-custody was fine while they built the surveillance state with crypto. Why? Because the elites want the exit as well. So they're trying to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible right now through nodes like Strategy, Borrow Against Your Bitcoin, Cantor Fitzgerald, Larry Fink, ETF, Van Eyck, all of these, Morgan Stanley, different trading platforms. They're trying to get as much Bitcoin so that you can lever it up so that they can have it. But you still get the Bitcoin in self-custody. And what's the beauty of the Bitcoin in self-custody? You get to boycott the Federal Reserve. By owning it in self-custody, you get to boycott BlackRock. And by not borrowing against it, you get to boycott the banks. And by not investing it in the S&P, you get to boycott this network of degeneracy that props up the proof of weapons network that's backed by all the violence that hopefully we're going to move to a more peaceful world right now for some. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative will build up certain countries, and China will eventually get predator, and we go through the whole cycle, predatory. But we are in the arms race. That artificial intelligence through both China and America and data centers located globally is going to suck up all the energy and all the commodities, and it is going to create mass unemployment, and everyone needs to be prepared for that. People need to know what is their strategy. You need to be building your community. Maybe you don't want to be in cities. Maybe you want to be more rural. Maybe you want to live in different countries that are going to benefit from multipolarity rather than the country that's not. Not everyone will be able to move. Not everyone's in that financial position, but maybe you can make the moves you need to make within your jurisdiction or your country. Because the military-industrial complex has a new role. We saw it in Venezuela. It is a militia rental military, the most powerful military. China will become more powerful, I forecast on this eventually. But it is working for transnational capital. It's not working for American national security. And because of these deals, there will be no World War III. Stop listening to people that are saying this is World War III. But there will be civil unrest, and they will bring in the surveillance state as the problem reaction solution. And there will be more and more false flags or manufactured violence that are real in order to do that, because remember, the MIC doesn't care. And that is going to be rolled out globally. and there's going to be sovereign people, and there's going to be everyone else. And that's why you need to focus on sovereign, because that's the story that we learn from all of this stuff. So protect yourself by building sovereign wealth. Boycott what you need to boycott. You'll never get this perfect. I still need to use AI and an iPhone, and I know what's behind it. But just commit to getting better every single day. And that's what we can do. I had a little podcast that's going to be coming out recently as well. I did an interview with Jeff Booth, and we were going through how black-pilled I am, but I'm trying to get people reality, because when a storm is coming, you don't want to pretend through positivity that the storm isn't coming. You want to know that it's coming so that you can get your raincoat, you can get your umbrella, you can fix the roof, and you can get everything set up to weather the storm. But the politicians and the media don't want you to know that it's happening while it's happening. And so I want to give you the black pill reality. And he was telling me about how you have to focus on the positive and the white pill. But I think it's this yin and yang that we need to get right here. Because you do need to focus on solutions, but solutions focused on praying that the storm doesn't come ain't going to fix it. And that's the reality right now. So I hope you enjoy. It's going to be coming out. I'll upload it to my YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, because I'm putting lots of interviews up there. We're also going to be breaking down all of these and uploading it to the podcasts on Spotify and Apple. I also, in case this language gets me taken off YouTube, or I'm building my social credit score that gets me taken off, I'll also build my Rumble score and back it up there and stream this to X. So follow me on X. That's where I do most of the real-time analysis. Follow me on Rumble so that there's a backup. And you can sign up at SimonDixon.com completely free, nothing to sell, because there's a membership portal where we back up as much as we can in case I get taken down, and we're trying to build some kind of more decentralized infrastructure that makes me more resistant to any kind of shadow banning or censorship that may happen as a result. But I get a sneaky suspicion right now that they're giving us freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach, so that we talk and we build our score. It's not perfect. It's not ideal. We're going to share this journey together. And it's all because you need to have community. So take care of yourself, take care of your family, and look around you. Get to know your neighbors, decide where you're going to live, start preparing for what comes ahead. Nothing stops this train. Always remember, you're alive at one of the most crazy and interesting times in financial history. Most are sadly going to get wrecked because they won't prepare. Others are going to do really well. I want you to be on the right side of this change. I'm hoping that if you take some of these steps and follow the money instead of following the media, you might be able to be one of those people that transitions with peace, love, and unity, rather than the people that are going to be useful idiots to manufacture civil unrest. And we're going to need a community of people that are sovereign and, have become effectively the people that are able to prepare people for this. So if you enjoy any of this content, keep sharing it, share it with people. If you need the shorter form, make sure you keep an eye on my blog and my YouTube channel, and we'll keep launching the shorter form versions, as well as those like me that want all the details so that you can master this subject, so that you can be more prepared for what happens next. And think of it like this. Many people have said in the comments, and I'd love to hear your comments, that once they understand this, they don't listen to any of the other propaganda. They can't even listen to other podcasts because they know they're serving a sponsorship, monetization, divide and conquer, radicalism agenda, whatever it may be. And they're all just prostitutes for whatever money they need. I was blessed that I don't need money because Bitcoin looked after me, because I believe there is a spiritual element and energy that comes with money that isn't used, that doesn't, once you find this stuff out, I think we have a duty to allocate our money to tap into that spiritual energy. There will always be this evil, this yin and yang. Without evil, you can't know good. And we'll keep sharing this journey together. So I will see you this time next week. That's everything from the World Economic Forum, retranslating the speeches, and then leaving you with actual actions that you can take and prepare so that you're not falling for the lies in the future. I'll see you for another episode of Simon Dixon Hard Talk Live. this time next week. Peace.